Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, I tap into John Lee's decades of reverse logistics experience. He discusses the importance of a seamless customer returns process, reasons for cart abandonment due to unclear return methods, and strategies for using data analytics to reduce returns. We also explore managing high return rates, innovative solutions for non-restockable items, challenges in store handling of returns, best practices in reverse logistics, and leveraging returns for environmental stewardship. John Lee, my friend, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
Great, Michael. How you doing?
I am thrilled to finally, after chasing you for years, get you on the microphone. I exaggerate a little bit, but we ran into each other literally this week at Retail Council of Canada's Store 24. We've known each other for a bunch of years, so I'm so happy that you're able to join me and share with me and some of the listeners some of your wisdom.
Well, it's a great topic, and sorry it's taken a bunch of years, but
you've been a busy fella. It's all right. You've been a busy guy.
Yeah.
Let's talk about you. So before we get started, you and I know each other well. I think back to Canada Post days when you were at Canada Post and I was at Hudson's Bay. So that's been a minute. But who are you, and what do you do for a living, and where do you like to spend your time, and what do you consider your expertise, or what do you focus on?
Oh, okay. Well, I've worked a bunch in Canada and internationally. Worked in a lot in the United States and about 30 other countries in retail, eCommerce, supply chain, logistics. You mentioned some time at Canada Post, so express and transportation as well in Canada and internationally. The past number of years, I've been working in various executive leadership roles in what's called the reverse logistics industry. Mm-hmm. And that's basically bringing products back from customers and back from stores in order to disposition returns or inventory that's stale and not selling, and getting that into a productive purpose. And I've done that at reverse logistics operators that are store retailers, mm-hmm. Such as treasure hunt stores in Canada. Worked in the U.S. For GoTRG. That's the online sales leader in that space. And then previous to them, worked for a publicly traded company based in the U.S., Liquidity Services, that does that style of liquidation, but in online auction marketplaces for retail, for government, for industrial assets, for all kinds of challenges in the reverse logistics field.
I love talking about reverse logistics. So I was really looking forward to our time today because I get asked a lot about returns. In fact, I just did an interview on Chorus about returns and how retailers thought about returns. And, I always start by saying, listen, returns happen in retail. It's part of the business. The magic and the secret sauce, the science and the magic, and the approach is, the savvy retailers understand it's both part of the business and an opportunity to have a great customer experience. And then B, the savvy retailers, and I say B because the B channel, know that they have product and that there's value, and how do you move it around, and there's a product that comes back. Of course, I have experience in the shopping channel. We had, product that would come back and, as you say, disposition it, as you and I would say. How do you think about returns strategically for retailers? How important is that seamless returns process now? You've seen retailers widen or tighten up returns policies. Some now say, you're going to have to pay to ship it back. Some have a restocking fee. Many say free to the store. But overall, in all your experience, when consumers think about a returns policy, are they thinking about it more? And how does it affect their choice of a retailer?
Well, that's a really good question. A returns process and what some call a seamless returns process is really an intimate part of the customer experience. And you can't think about it in isolation from other parts of the customer experience.
Right.
And in discussions of, what can we do to reduce returns? Well, there are some things retailers can do to reduce returns, but returns are here to stay. And in some categories, they're even going to grow with things like bracket purchasing that we'll talk about a little later.
Sure, sure. And for the listeners, bracket purchasing is where you want one size, but you buy a size in either side because you're not sure how it's going to fit. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, exactly. Or different colors. You're not sure
right.
Because of the online rendering of the color. I'm not sure if I want this color or that one. I'll get 3 of them and I'll send 2 back.
Yeah, jewelry. We experienced that with jewelry, right? Because we often told people, you're not buying the jewelry. You're not actually getting the jewelry you're looking at on the picture. You're getting something very close to it. Natural product could be slightly different kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
We didn't encourage them to buy 3, but return one, but, you know.
Yeah. But, you know, there's 2 elements to the answer of your question. When you talked about, you know, how important is a seamless returns process. Recent surveys, and I'll quote as we talk, I'll quote from a couple of different surveys, but one that PayPal did last year said that 86% of online purchasers check the retailer's return policy before they complete a purchase.
Oh, interesting.
So they go online, research, they select the items they want, and then they do a little pause and they say, just a minute, I'm just going to go check that returns policy before I proceed. And what they're looking for is ease of use for them, not the one method that retailer has chose to offer, but what are the choices and what is ease of use for them? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The second thing that they're looking for, and we heard this at the Retail Council Store 24, that purchasers are looking for more and more and more, especially millennials and younger generations, which now make up more than half of the shoppers in Canada and the United States. They're looking for evidence of corporate good, environmental stewardship, community participation. They don't just want to buy your stuff. They want to know that you're a good corporate citizen. And that actually is all bound up, at least in part, in the returns process as well.
You know, I like that discussion, but I'm very skeptical, I have to tell you, because there are China direct models that have nothing to do with all those things you just described. I often call them landfill direct. And yet they're the most fastest growing retail in the history of all time, and 215 million. So, you know, how do you reconcile those two things? Do they hold different retailers accountable at a higher level, or is it, listen, I can't afford it. I'd like you to be better at what you do, and I understand things need to kind of get dispositioned, if we can use that word again. But I don't know. Are they walking the talk? Do you really think that matters, or you know, you've been there, you've had that experience, so you tell me.
Yeah. So I do think that you know, you're calling out an important difference of, you know, multiple flavors out there in purchaser behavior. And some of it may be, are you walking the talk? Or are you just answering the survey in a particular way? But I think as well, preferences evolve to, you know, as demographics affect what the purchase community is. You know, go back to that point that I said, more than half the shoppers in the market today are millennials and younger. You know, that wasn't the case 10 years ago.
Sure.
And
they tell us they care. They tell us they care. So the idea is they must care a little bit, or they may make some decisions.
Yeah.
They certainly get up in arms, and I'm being very broadly saying they, you know, when they discover that, you know, oh my goodness, I didn't know you throw stuff out, or it gets incinerated, or it gets crushed. They're kind of appalled at that a little bit. And I've often said, well, what do you think happens with it? I mean, we can't sell a broken item, or I guess sometimes it gets pragmatic. We can't plug every item in. Like this idea of managing the returns, you know, when they start to understand that, they do start to have, you know, that impact of, oh, I didn't want that to happen. I just wanted to return it.
Yes. And I think there's a bit of a complicated answer to your question in that if you think back over the past number of years, when it's hit the media that a particular retailer has product flow into landfill, there's really an explosion of customer
angst,
disgust about that. and there's an immediate impact on the retailer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, day to day.
Is it? Let me ask you this: immediate. I would recognize an immediate impact, but is it a immediate long term impact? Do people now? I'm never. It feels like it flares up and then people get
but
habits.
One thing that consumers are telling us is if you send stuff to landfill,
mm-hmm.
you're rolling the dice in two ways. So maybe that impact is not long term. Maybe that impact is short term. But if it hits the media that X thousand truckloads of merchandise are being sent to landfill every year because you couldn't be bothered to figure out a viable returns process, you're rolling the dice as to whether that impact is short term or long term, but you're also missing an opportunity. And the opportunity is to build a robust returns process that provides options to consumers. You can do that and have a financially viable process. You can also have a process that reports good environmental results so that when those customers are shopping online, you're able to gain the upside of saying, we welcome a return if that's what you choose to do, and here's how we handle them. And this much of our returns products are able to be sold, resold to other consumers. And stuff that's damaged or unsellable, here's what we do with it to be environmentally responsible. And we know that of that 86% of purchasers that say they're going to check the returns policy before they do anything further, they're also interested, and we've seen research in this, not in return surveys, but that they're interested in the retailers they buy from being good corporate citizens. And if you remember what Greg Hicks said yesterday when he was talking about Canadian Tire's results, as they focused on customer value and customer data, they found that their top 13% most valuable customers, and he didn't quote a number, but he said they're hugely more profitable to the business. And those customers have told them that they value the community credentials that Canadian Tire brings to the market. So I think it's both. How do you avoid the negative of rolling the dice and we just send stuff to landfill, but you're also passing up the opportunity to build new customer value and retain more customers by having a good story to tell.
So let's talk about return rates, because everyone asks me what a return rate is, and of course I say, well, it depends on the commodity and it depends on in store or online. But what's the range that we'd want to talk about, and then what are the strategies? Because you're starting to get into that very interesting thing that there's a lot of strategies that retailers can employ to manage that reverse flow of goods. Get value out of it, and do all the good things too. Not send less to landfill, less to incinerators, and get good value. So first of all, what are you seeing, and what are return rates these days? Have they changed materially from when from a bunch of years ago? Talk about the rate and the rate trends, and then some strategies that retailers can employ to get their arms around it.
So the answer that you mentioned, you're bang on the money. What I've seen in the industry for general merchandise retailing, and the retailers don't, publicize their returns rates, but generally speaking, for general merchandise retail, hard goods, and some soft goods, it's 7 to 10% of sales. But when you get further into soft goods and apparel, the number gets as high as 33 to 35%.
We would have seen that number if you and I were running the Sears catalog business 20 years ago. We would have seen similar numbers, I would bet, right?
Yeah, but the difference with the Sears catalog business is right from the get-go, they had engineered the flowback process into their whole business model. So it wasn't an issue. Retailers that don't have that opportunity today, that are seeing 33 to 30 or 35 to 50% returns rates in apparel because of the bracket purchasing that we were talking about earlier, that is a huge issue. That's a huge issue to deal with from a cost point of view, as well as from a customer experience perspective. So, but that's 7 to 10 to 12%, 33%, and in some categories of apparel, as high as 50% because of bracketing.
And I always think of things in threes sometimes, but if I think of, there's a percentage of goods that are returned that are restocked. There's a percentage of goods that go into a disposition process that could be everything from going to an outlet store, to an outlet tab on a website, to an employee sale, to a B channel jobber. And then there's a percentage that just go nowhere because they're, they need to be crushed or they need to be dealt with or for whatever. What do those percentages look like? If you can, 1, 2, 3, how much gets put back on shelf? And again, these are big industry averages I'm asking you for. And then, how much get adjudicated, and then how much kind of doesn't go anywhere and it just got to get destroyed.
Yeah. And a good question. Depending on the retail category that you're talking about, it's typically anywhere between 15 to 20%, up to as much as 30%. That's retail perfect and can go back on the shelf. It's all the rest of it, and it's a lot of product. So if you think of all of the returns, customer returns. And I'm not talking about non-productive inventory. So that's stale inventory that's not moving, it's trailing season, it's whatever. But just customer returns in Canada and the US is about a $760 billion number, US.
So basically, you've got a good amount of things that go back on shelf. Tell the listeners, maybe they might not know about the B channel. How does the B channel work? Because what I see in the evolution of the B channel is, YouTubers who buy these big manos of returns and then actually make more money filming how they get surprised or not surprised. I mean, some of these big, this is a new phenomenon to me where, retailers would take a big mano returns and then just sell it as is, and you get what you get. Like that's a super interesting way. That's one way retailers are getting rid of their returns. It's not everybody's, but talk about that B channel and how that exists. And
sure.
That was part of Treasure Hunt, right? That was a big part of your store.
Yes. And in that 70% to 80% that's not retail perfect, in that there's consumer electronics, there's small appliances, all of which are amenable to being what's called condition graded, tested, some very basic refurbishment done, and then being sold as a B stock item. And, savvy retailers that handle product like that will work with liquidation partners who can provide that refurbishment services, and they build their A stock and their B stock and C stock merchandise prices very consciously to address that need. So you're going to find, when you've got an A stock and a B stock opportunity, you're going to find a little bit of rigidity in A stock pricing, but you're going to find partners out there that, and let's take the example of TVs, a refurbished TV with no cosmetic damage is going to sell for about 65 to 72, 73% of retail. And then based on the cosmetics and the functionality, there's going to be price brackets that step down from there.
Right.
But that's
it's scratch and dent stuff or whatever.
Exactly.
So functional, but the as you say, the cosmetic appearance may
and are the scratches on the front of the TV? Or are they on the back? Right. Two different prices.
Can't be seen. Yeah. I've got a fridge. I got a couple of goods here in my house that I bought scratch and dent, and it's got a little dent in the side of the fridge, but it's my downstairs beer fridge. So it was fine.
And it's probably up against the side of a counter. So who cares?
Yeah. Who cares? Don't care. Don't see it. Doesn't bother me.
Yep.
All good. Now I just want to explore pull on one thread. Now let's talk about brand protection, because I know that often comes up. There are brands who don't want to see their brand in an outlet or a B channel store. What happens to those products? How do those kind of they must put some rules around where stuff can wind up, and B, how do they think about handling and adjudicating returns when they're like, listen, I don't want to see. I have a prestige brand, for example. I don't want to see that in a B store or on a clearance site. How do you and how do they think about that?
So there's two things. Once you start moving over into this area, and brand protection is one really important measure, and I'll answer your question in just a second, but it's one part of thinking about the whole reverse process. So, the most important thing a retailer can do is not just think about brand protection, but think about the whole process and put, some care and some analytics into that process, so you can think about every step, design something that works for your brand, produces great financial results, but also produces great sustainability results. So it's not just one thing. There's several. There's a whole collection of things. In the same way the forward supply chain's got some complexity to it, the reverse supply chain is a supply chain. You have to think of it as a whole. But coming specifically to your question around brand protection, there's a whole range of things you can do that start with simple fraud protection measures, like getting the reverse logistics partner to do a barcode strike through, which is a vertical heavy marker line through a UPC code. So what does that do? It means it can't be brought back to the host retailer and returned as if it was just bought there. In terms of, I don't want to throw this product out, but I don't want you selling it in certain geographies or selling it at certain prices. Retailers pick partners and will set geographic conditions around where products can be sold, what prices they can be sold at. Is the brand identity on the label intact, or has somebody crossed it out or defaced it in some way? And
or the B channel retailer can't place ads with that brand, and they
exactly
have to say,
you can't advertise it at all.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Major consumer brand power tool. They would never say the brand. That kind of stuff. Yeah.
And the bigger and more capable partners, and I've worked for some of these, are also able to say, look, I can get it right out of the geography that's of a concern to you. And that could be a regional geography within Canada or the United States, or it could be getting it right out of North America, depending on what the product category is and the potential for returns. And those are the kinds of strategies that savvy retailers will think through with their partner. But the key is have a partner that brings a lot of capability to the table and can address all these measures in an integrated process.
What are that? There's retailers who handle this themselves individually, but there are services that kind of do a centralized approach. Nobody in the store will touch it. It all goes to a centralized facility who all does and has that expertise of handling it. Is the payoff there because you got to pay for their fee? Like, how do you think about that? And is that a win for retailers not handling an individual in the store and centralizing it? What's the trend there?
Generally, when retailers handle it in the store themselves and run clearance aisles and that kind of thing, they generally don't look at all the costs and the opportunity costs of doing that. Because there's opportunity costs for the merchant. I've never met a merchant who said, I want less shelf space available in the store. Generally,
said no merchant ever. That's right.
Yeah.
Said no merchant
and
ever.
So what are you doing running a clearance store in what is a primary market retailer. Like, don't do that. And what I've seen, and with provable financial results to support it, is keeping it really simple. Is it retail perfect or isn't it? If it's not retail perfect, put it in the Gaylord, put it on the pallet that goes back to a partner. Have a really good process in terms of brand protection, the procedures, whatever. Think about how you create economies of scale as well. Can you add in unproductive inventory? Are there recalls? Are there buybacks? Are there?
In other words, you've got the partnership. Let's use it for other things, not just returns.
Yes. And bring all that stuff back to a partner that can execute on it at industrial scale, with visibility, with transparency, with reporting. And because otherwise what happens is store hours budgets, which are challenged enough as there were. And again, I never have met a store operator who said, yeah, I think I need to give some of my hours budget back to corporate because they're like allocating too many hours. So you end up getting store hours budgets challenged with running mini return centers and what are called return to vendor centers, like in the back of the store. There's the space. And because those things are complex, they tend to attract your most skilled employees to try and manage that, let alone the customer service challenges of running a little discount center and how do you price it?
I hadn't thought of that. How do you, that quality of employee, that I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that at all. Interesting.
Yeah, and it ends up creating something that starts attracting cost and building up critical mass that you never intended, and it gets in the way of retailing. Similarly, when a retailer gets it back to the warehouse, if they think that this is fine wine and not just general merchandise, so it can sit around and it gets better with age, they'll sort it to try and pull out best categories to liquidate. And they end up with aging inventory that's not moving. And it becomes a larger and larger problem. So the answer really is retail perfect, put it on the shelf. If it's not, build a process that you've put similar thought into that goes into your forward process, into your reverse. Get a partner who, this is all they do. And they've got the software to support your reporting, your sustainability reporting.
In your experience, that'll pay for itself. That'll more than pay for itself. And your recommendation would be seriously look at that.
Very much so, because you leverage economies of scale, and now this product's just flowing. And when you add on, by the way, we've sat with your sustainability team and we've aligned with their metrics, so we can take all the avoided landfill from reselling this product either in Canada or the United States or overseas. We
Caribbean
can
or wherever,
take all that avoided landfill and we can plug it into your sustainability metrics, and your corporate team can create a really good story, especially if you start integrating donations. So think of product that's low recovery or hard to refurb. Bring in the corporate donations team. You can be donating school supplies to schools. You can be donating sporting goods that are damaged and unsellable to sports teams and leagues that will break it down and create 2 bicycles that work out of 3 that are broken, for instance.
Right.
And integrate the donations process. And now you've got a pretty interesting community and sustainability story that you can post for those, what did we say, 86% of shoppers that want to check the returns policy and care about those things.
Where do folks go to get in touch and learn more and continue to tap into that wisdom? How do they get in touch with you?
Thanks, Mike. It's really been an interesting conversation, and it's one I'm passionate about, and I could talk about it all day too.
Yeah.
We've skimmed the surface, but
Yeah.
people want to get a hold of me by email, John, John, at jdlassociates.ca. That's my consulting business, and happy to help. And if they're on LinkedIn, I'm John D. Lee Toronto. Yeah, this is, and especially as the preferences of an evolving consumer base and millennials, becoming more influential purchasers, especially as all those changes are happening, the opportunity to do amazing things with the returns process really abound.
Well, let's leave it there. Let's leave it on that great note, and I'll put links to both your email and your LinkedIn profile so folks can find you. John, thanks so much for joining me on the mic. Well worth the wait, I have to say. It's great insights, great understanding of something that I'm, as I've been saying, both interested in and curious about, and want to continue to learn. So thanks for joining me on the mic and the Voice of Retail podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Michael. I appreciate it, and it's a great subject. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global eCommerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bon, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.